A little one. Hi, I'm Caroline Levitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Place, along with Jenna Blum, who is on tour now for her wonderful book, Woodrow on the Bench. And I have to tell you that today I'm really, really excited because this book, Miss Metropolitan by Carolyn Ferrell, is one of my favorite unsettling, disturbing, magnificent, genius books of the year. I have not been able to stop thinking about it. And as soon as I read it, I thought, I have to talk with her. So I'm delighted to have Carolyn here. And thank you so much for being here, Carolyn.
Thank you for inviting me. I just feel so honored to be here. Thank you.
No, Carolyn Ferrell, she's originally a short story writer. Her first collection, Don't Erase Me, won awards from the Los Angeles Times, Plowshares, and more. Her stories have been selected for anthologies by the wonderful Roxane Gay and Curtis Sittenfeld, among others. She's a recipient of grants from Fulbright, NEA, and she teaches writing at Sarah Lawrence College and lives in New York. So let's talk about Miss Metropolitan. First, look at this cover. This cover is astonishing. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So Miss Metropolitan is about a lot of things on the surface, and there's a lot of different layers to this amazing book. It's about three teenagers, Gwen, Fern, and Jacina, abducted by a man they call Boss Man. All of them held captive for 10 years, locked in a basement at a house in Queens. Some of them escape. They're rescued, and as I was reading it, there's a question that probes through there, which is, are they really? Well, what does being rescued mean when your past is so harrowing? Before I start peppering you with questions, I want to read some of the reviews, which have been just amazing, amazing. Jacqueline Woodson, who's a National Book Award winner of Brown Girl Dreaming, said, such a beautifully rendered and provocative novel. Ferrell has given me a world I could never have imagined, filled with so many people I feel like I've always known. A stunner. I totally agree. Roxane Gay says, sometimes to write about a horrifying trauma and its resounding effects, you have to write towards the heart of the matter in unexpected ways. Carolyn Ferrell does just that. Her novel is a monumental provocation. That word provocation is exactly true. And it heralds great things to come from an immensely talented writer. I agree. I'm just blown away. So this book, Carolyn, was drawn from Ariel Castro's kidnappings of three women in Cleveland. But you transcend this story into something much, much deeper. It's really a story about what does it mean to be rescued? What is our responsibility towards others? Who do we ignore and why when they're in trouble? So I wanted to know, like, what was that whole process like? You heard about the Castro kidnappings. How did it become this novel?
Thank you for those questions and that wonderful introduction. Well, I'll start off by saying that there were actually a couple of inspirations for this. Definitely the Ariel Castro case. I followed it with everyone, and the question that really hit me was, how could three girls disappear for 10 years? And I immediately looked at the community and thought, how could the community lose three girls for 10 years? There was also that case that took place in Austria, that horrific case where the father locked his daughter up for decades. And there were other, smaller but no less horrific events that happened that I was following. And I just kept asking this question, when I set out to write this book, because I just felt so compelled by the real life inspirations, I realized that I had to turn to fiction because I was not interested in writing a true crime story for a number of reasons, the least of which was that the victims of the Ariel Castro case were still alive, and I didn't feel that I had the right to write their story. I wasn't aiming to do a true crime story, and fiction just allowed me the freedom to reimagine cases like this and to really inhabit the characters. So that was what that was what kind of spurred me on, and I had to create my own characters. I had to put it in a different setting, a setting that I knew a little bit better than I really don't know Cleveland at all, but um, I I was really possessed by these questions of community, the
Mhm.
community of mothers. What did the community owe the girls, and it wasn't really a question about liberation after captivity. It was, how do you go on after this? How do the
Right.
girls go on, and how do the communities go on? And Miss Metropolitan, the main character in Dear Miss Metropolitan, or one of the main characters in Dear Miss Metropolitan, I see her that way. Uh, she really is so saddled with this survivor's guilt and this question of, how did I not know? Why did I choose to look away?
That was actually my next question. First, I want to show the cover again because the book is a name called Miss Metropolitan. But the interesting thing about this cover is there's these sort of like starbursts here, and I thought that's really strange because when you look at that cover, you think, what is this book about? Because the stars sort of amplify it. The interesting thing about Miss Metropolitan is why the book was called that. And it's when you first start reading the book, you wonder, why is it called that? But as soon as she comes on, you realize, as she keeps questioning herself, why didn't I do something? How could I not have known? And the girls, as they're in captivity, they're all asking the same question, just, is anybody looking for us? And if they're not, why aren't they? What do we owe other people in the area? So I wanted to ask you, in terms of, you're titling the book Miss Metropolitan, and these wonderful stars on the cover. Tell us about that. Did you get any? Did the publisher say, well, I don't want? Did you have any input in the
I
cover?
did. I
Okay,
did actually, and thank you for. I mean, I love the cover. I
I
absolutely
love
love
the
the
cover.
cover,
It's
and
great.
I was so lucky that my input was actually people asked for my input. And it's funny. No one has ever asked me about these little
Oh,
starbursts,
I
and
love them. They're amazing.
they really are. And I know that I've read some comments about the book that the cover doesn't really tell you what the cover's really cheerful and beautiful, and it doesn't really tell you what's inside the book.
I think
Um,
it does.
I thought it did too. I was
I
actually very drawn to the art of Lorna Simpson and the art department at Holt. I won't say that they imitated her, but they kind of grabbed that essence of Lorna Simpson's art. And I noticed the purple. The purple was great. It was just such a great. And I noticed on the
yeah.
author page that my name is in purple too, which I absolutely loved. Um, but these little starbursts for me were, the first thing that I thought about. I thought about the stars and how there's one point where Fern is just thinking about the last time that she was out in the world before she is kidnapped, before she's abducted and taken into the house by Boss Man, and just wishing that she had listened to the night bird and, the night sky. So
Right.
those stars reminded me of that, but they were also, as light a beacon, that there's
Mhm.
always
That's right.
there was some kind of beacon, and I think that, if I were to give my interpretation, and of course I always say the author never knows what the book is about, but my interpretation is that this beacon is really the beacon inside of the girls, that they really had
Yes.
to make their own community.
I also want to say that when I saw the stars, I thought it had a lot to do with life force. And I want to mention that this book is also hilariously funny. As disturbing as it is, there are quizzes in here where I was just, laughing. And the thing is, the quizzes came at the perfect time because you're reading all these harrowing details. And then there's a really funny bit that has you laughing out loud. Um, so before my next question, I want to tell everybody out there, any questions you have, put them in the chat and we'll ask them. Don't be shy. So I want to talk to you about the structure of the novel. I was talking earlier that this novel is amazing. It has, let me try to get this. It's throughout, beside the quizzes, there's photographs, there's fairy tales, there's different stories. It creates this incredibly brilliant, prismatic feeling. And it also creates something else, that there's a whole notion of there's something beyond what we are seeing. Just like the people who are in the neighborhood saying, like, well, how could we not have known? I mean, there's also the humor that's woven in with the horror. The structure is just absolute genius. I got to tell you, I was looking at it, I thought, wow, I gotta ramp up my game. So tell us about how you decided to write this book structured the way it is.
Well, thanks for all that. I have to say though, before I answer that question, that one of my colleagues, Brian Morton, I gave him an advanced copy to read, and he very graciously wrote a blurb for me. But he wrote me an email and he said, "I can't believe how harrowing this book was, and all these mentions of Judge Judy." So
Right.
for me, it really was the humor was about these characters preserving their humanity, that
Mhm.
it would not just be suffering all the time, that they had to figure out a way to survive. And humor is just, an essential tool to survival. But in terms of the structure, when I first began a draft, and this is a story I've told a couple of times, so I'm sorry if anyone in the audience has already heard it, but when I first began the draft, I was really taken by the voices of the girls, but I didn't really know what the book required of me. I thought that I would write a linear narrative and that the reader would be reading towards liberation. It would be captivity and then liberation would be the end. And so I wrote it as a linear novel. And I got to the end, which was about 100 pages, and I realized it was too short. But it just did not resound for me. And what was missing was, my way of inhabiting the characters, which was their way of inhabiting their experience, which
Mhm.
was through fragmentation. And,
Right.
the introduction of the different voices, the different perspectives, the documents, the photographs. This is everybody's story, and everybody has a take on this story. And the girls are in this captivity, and their pasts were already fragmented. But here in this, in this house where they're kept, it's truly fragmented. But here in the house, fragmentation was a kind of strategy for the girls, a survival strategy. And I wanted the reader to experience that a similar kind, or maybe not similar at all, but a sort of fragmentation in reading the book, that there really is no linearity, actually. It's kind of, it's going into the future, it's in the past, it's just the sum of their experience.
I think that's why it really got under my skin so much, because it wasn't the traditional narrative. And it was very, in real life, in a situation like this, there is no ending where everything is tied up neatly in a bow and we're all fine. And it's like, well, that was difficult, but now I can move on. No, you can't.
Right.
You
And
absolutely
that
can't.
I really thought about that. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I really
No, no,
thought
no.
about after the Ariel Castro case, for example, when I remember seeing one of the women appear on Dr. Phil, and there was just something so exploitative about it. It was just,
Yeah.
is this about helping? Is it about healing? And I think that his intentions were probably good, but there was something about it that just it didn't really make sense to like put people on stage like that.
I
There was something
absolutely
that was,
I agree.
it wasn't right. It didn't sit right,
I absolutely agree. I mean, there's like, this book has been getting like astonishingly great reviews. Some people have asked, why do we require the most devastating of details, that it was an uncomfortable read for them? And when I read that, I wanted to scream, that's the point. you know, that
Right.
is the point. Because my feeling is that when things are brought out into the light, they lose their power, or you are able to look at them differently. And they're they're also written, and with empathy and insight. I feel that that was your intention, that it wasn't to be this shocking for shock's sake. It was meant
Right.
to, this is reality, this is life. Nobody talks about this, people should. Is that
Right.
correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And now it's interesting that in the past summer, things have really changed in terms of missing brown and black girls. With the abduction and murder of Gabby Petito, people have spoken out and said, nobody wished her to die, but people have been speaking out. Well, why don't black and brown girls, indigenous women, get the same attention when they go missing? And, I think one positive thing to come out of the experience is that there is now more focus, not
There's
enough,
more
on
focus.
these missing women of color, girls, that their lives act, that they're not disposable. So I think that's something that's so powerful that has come out of all of this.
Yeah, and about time. About time. It's always, the narrative is always, they
Right,
don't have, people don't people feel like, well, they're not like me, so it doesn't matter as much. But
right,
actually it does matter as much, if
right.
not more. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit about the case that's in the news now. And if
Rittenhouse.
this guy with the assault records had not been white, it would have been very, very different. And it's very hard to argue against that. And we
Mhm.
can only hope that that kind of stuff is going to change. I
Right.
also want to talk about, what was horrifying for me, in the best possible way, was how the girls are always categorized. It's almost like the media is trying to categorize them. They're categorizing themselves. They're often called, well, I'm pretty enough or whatever. And the
Mhm.
thing that I really loved is that you gave their abuser boss man his own point of view. And he was able to tell his own stories, almost as if he wanted the girls to sympathize with him or understand him. And I loved that. First, I love that because I think understanding is always key. So I wanted to know, what was your decision to give him a point of view? Why do you think that was important? I have my own theories, but I want to hear
It
yours.
was really important for me because, it's not that I didn't want the reader to like him, but I
Right.
did want the reader to sympathize. And I wanted, in order for that to happen, I had to give him dimension. And that meant giving him some backstory and possible explanation as to why he turned out the way he did. It was in no way to excuse him because he really was a pretty horrible person. But as a character, he has to have dimension, or else he becomes symbolic, or just kind of flat character. So,
I
you
I
know,
totally agree. I totally agree. The other reason why I ask is, um, I gave a um, I gave this guy who was acting inappropriately a point of view in one of my books, and I was called out for it. And they said, "Well, you must really like pedophiles to give him his own point of view." And my feeling was, no, that's not it. It's like everybody has a reason why they are the way they
right,
are, and it's good to
right.
know it. So I want to talk about your Jumping in the Future, which was so thrilling to read. You go into like 2038.
Hmm.
Um, I wanted to know, not, I love that you jumped in the future and showed us what was going on, but then I started to think when I closed the book, well, why did you stop in 2039? Can you talk about the impact of time as it holds to trauma? And I also wanted to know, where do you think these people are now? I mean, like
That's
10 years after 2039.
right. Well, to answer the second question first, I think that, um, well, there are two choices. Maybe Fern and Gwenny are with Fern's brother Bud, and his husband living, in Rockland County, or maybe they're still living together, preserving their own space, but still, indulging as aunts to all of the children who have been adopted. And that for me, that was just such an interesting question. Because I thought, well, should I just make it an ending where the women then go and live with Bud and happily ever after? But there was something about Fern and Gwenny's space that was really sacred, and I wanted to preserve it and leave it ambiguous. Maybe they will go. Um, so, uh, so that was one thing, and now, of course, I'm forgetting the first part of your question because I answered the second one
Let me
first.
see. I might have
Oh, why I
I
stopped
might
at
have.
2039. I actually don't know why I stopped at 2039, but I was thinking about um, the character Catania, and I wanted to make her old enough to, as an adult, to kind of work through her own mysteries. So I kind of settled on that date. It went back and forth, but one of the things I was thinking about is um, what is the ending that I was, trying to write towards? And it really is not about, closure, because closure
Right.
goes on until you die. You're having closure all the time, so there is no ending
There's no
point.
closure.
However, you don't have to suffer in the same ways. You don't have to, you can make peace with certain things. And that was what I wanted to show with the, Vern and Gwenny at Central Park, and just ways that they figured out to make peace with what they knew. So that's what I was thinking about in terms of the future. But it's interesting just to go back to something that you were talking about before about, people asking questions. When a review of Dear Miss Metropolitan appeared in the Times, I can't remember it was either Dwight Garner or the other review. Um, there were letters to the editor, and a lot of the letters were like, trauma porn, trauma porn. This is trauma
That's not
porn.
what it is.
I and I thought about that. I mean, I don't really I don't consider it trauma porn at all, but that question of how much can the reader take, I did think a lot about not overwhelming the reader and still immersing them in the experience, because there were things that I took out of the book that my editor and agent just felt would be too much. And, upon reflection, that was actually true. I don't want to overwhelm the reader, but I do want to immerse them in this experience and not turn away.
I think I think the prismatic nature of oh, I hear myself twice. I think the prismatic nature of the book stopped us from feeling overwhelmed because there were the kind of starbursts of humor. And again, as I say, I think anything that we understand that comes out into the light, and there were so many layers of stuff in here. So I would never call it trauma porn. I want to talk about the men in the book. We see Fern's younger brother, who's a young black boy who's also gay, trying to navigate that. And of course, we have the perpetrator. But I felt that all of this transcends your novel far beyond the story of kidnapped girls. I thought, in a way, it was really about a culture that also kidnaps people in a different way by giving them restrictions where they cannot go any further, or there's certain pain. There's certain pain that Fern's younger brother is going to face that a rich white kid on the Upper East Side is not going to face. I mean, that's society and culture. So I wonder if you could talk about this.
Well, that's interesting. Another male character I thought a lot about was Mr. P, Gwenny's stepfather. And I looked at what prevented him from, at first he's very engaged with her, but what prevented him from giving himself completely was the specter of religion and organized religion in that
Right,
sense.
right,
I
right,
don't
right.
mean spirituality, I mean organized religion. And that really was a roadblock in their relationship and in their feelings toward one another also, and it was important for me to have him have insight at the end. That was how Boss Man, I don't think ever has insight, but something does happen within him that he allows the doors to be open, and I don't think he's really conscious of it. But something happens with him. Something is transformed in him, however small. Something is transformed in Bud, Fern's brother, in that he starts to advocate for himself. He's also terribly victimized, and He learns how to advocate for, what I say about the girls is that they learn how not only to survive, but to flourish. And I feel like a lot of all of the characters really, with a few notable exceptions, that's what they do. It's not just about survival, it's about
Right,
flourishing.
right. While you were writing this book, what was your state of mind? Was there ever a time where you felt like I can't do this? Or um, did you feel traumatized as you're writing about trauma?
I have to say I must have. I must have felt traumatized. I never really thought about it in that way because I felt so dedicated to the subject matter that it just had to get written. But I'm sure, if you ask my therapist, she'd probably say I was traumatized. She probably would say that. I was so dedicated to these characters, and I just kind of plowed ahead with the story. I would say that I'll give a small example. The poet Mark Strand
Mhm.
once came to Sarah Lawrence right before he died. He came to Sarah Lawrence, and he gave a short lecture in which he said that he had kind of run out of things to say in poetry, so he was going to move to prose. And then he made a statement, sort of like, "Well, I don't know how much I'm going to have to say in prose either." And I just remember thinking, taking care of my two kids, working full time, trying to write. I was like, I would never in a million years run out of things to say. I can write until I'm 197 and I'll still have things to write about. And I guess in juggling all of the things that I had in my life, I didn't really allow myself to sit back and say, and really experience the trauma of the book. I just moved ahead. So there's always something on the back burner, kids, school,
Right.
college, et cetera, et cetera.
So, I wanted to also ask that a lot of writers, I ask writers this question all the time because I guess I'm hoping for an answer I can use. Do you feel that writing this Metropolitan has helped you with the next novel you're writing? Do you feel like you've learned things from it? Or do you feel like, no, the next project is a totally new project and that's not the way it works for you?
No, I can't. It's nothing. Everything is a continuum. So I can't say that the next project will be a totally different. I mean, I am in the beginning of another project, but what I really learned from Dear Miss Metropolitan is that I love fragmentation. I knew it beforehand, but I really loved it now. And there, when I was coming up and reading, there weren't many books like that were fragmented. There were people who did fragmented sort of projects, and I'm thinking of Eduardo
Mhm.
Galeano, but his books were sort of history and myth mixed together, but these short fragments, and Marguerite Duras and other writers, and I came to realize that I love that idea. Jamaican writer Michelle Cliff also uses that strategy of fragmentation as a form of resistance, and that's always stayed with me. So I think that's probably going to be in the next book as well,
Good.
probably in different form, but it will still inform the next book.
It's funny because when you're talking about it, I opened the book because I thought, oh, I want to see some of the fragmentation. And then I forgot I saw another question I want to ask because this is model employees inventory to show you how funny the book is, as told to Dr. Ezra during the taping of episode 2 of Heal Thyself with Dr. Ezra. So first of all, that's part of it's just hilarious to read, but also these girls call themselves model employees, which is both wonderful and terrifying. And I wonder if you can talk about that for a little bit.
Well, again, I think that they really had to, everything was fragmented, and they had to set about the project of world building. So they have these weird names for the different places in the house: pass through chasm, and pipes high and low,
Mhm.
and broken down washing machine, and they also, have these names, and Boss Man is pretty instrumental in that, in calling them, trying to get them to see that they're, you know, work makes good in a terrible echo of other things. He work will make you free, and calling them model employees. Um, that the name just sort of stuck with them. Even the way they thought about food, which was such a scarce resource.
Right, they eat pages, magazine pages of food. But there's that word model. I mean, at one point in the book, somebody says to one of the girls, I forget which one, but you look like a model. I mean, so there's that, like, what beauty does and doesn't.
Right.
All these stories and names really save these girls and their captivity in a way. I was wondering, like, do you hope that this book, the stories in this book, can do the same for people reading it?
I would love that. That would be amazing. That would be the biggest gift to me if this book made a difference in people's lives. Uh, I just, it was just so important for me to shine this light on these girls. And it, with everything is a risk in writing, but it was just utterly important to tell their stories, and not in a kind of sociological way, but in a way that the
A real
reader could identify with them. I think about the dark characters in Edward P. Jones' work, and how they're so scary, and yet we identify with them, and that's sort of what I
yes,
wanted for
because it's
my
human.
right. Yeah.
Can you I love the caseworker who they girls call Miss Refuge. Can you talk about her? Tell us about, it's so funny because as I'm turning the pages, I'm seeing all these love potions, number 5, and spelled towards good grades, and it's just there's so many wonderful things here. So anyway, I'm sorry I'm getting ahead of myself. Talk about Miss Refuge for us.
Miss Refuge, I wanted her to, like, I mean, she is there to take care of the girls, but I also wanted her to be like the girl, in the same way the girls are a work in progress. She's a
Mhm.
work in progress. She's taking these classes, these psychology classes. She wants to improve herself in this way. And, some of that psychology is really kind of like TV's Dr. Ezra's pop psychology. It doesn't really, it's kind of strange. But she really, she wanted to improve herself. And of course, her life is infinitely improved by the interaction with these women and with these girls. And I wanted to show that she would be in their lives forever. So in 2039, Miss Refuge is still with them, and she's still a kind of caretaker, even though she's, she's older, but she's still a caretaker. And they take care of her too. So that was what I was thinking.
It's lovely. I want to show another photo. This is right before the chapter, Once Upon a Time in Queen. Let's see if I can get it in there. It's people dancing. I want to know, these photos are just, a lot of them are photos you yourself took. Where did the idea of the photos come from? And how did you choose which photo goes where?
That's a really good question. Well, I have always thought about putting photos with my fiction, and I once wrote a story for an anthology in, I think it was 2007 or 2009, and the story was made up of fragments. And I said, I want to add photos. And the editor, who was really wonderful, she said, too expensive, can't do it. And it always stayed in my mind, I want to add photos. And, I think about writers who have done it successfully, W.G. Sebald, for example, or Marianne
Mhm.
Wiggins. Um, Her Shadowcatcher was a huge influence when I saw how she used photos. But I was thinking more of Sebald's use of photos in a book like Austerlitz, for example, where
Right.
the photos don't correspond to what is happening on the page, but they create a kind of resonance, and something is seeping into our mind. We're reading this, but the Holocaust is seeping into our mind. And I
Yeah.
had the same sort of feeling with Dear Miss Metropolitan that I didn't want it to be a one-on-one correspondence, but I wanted the photos to appear in different places to create resonance, and also to kind of reiterate the fact that everything is connected, that all of these experiences are connected, that the community's experience is connected to the girls, the mothers, the neighbor women who are also culpable and get locked in the church basement.
Right,
Everything is
right.
connected.
It's amazing. I want to say again to anybody, if we have any questions, Ollie, can you put them up if we have them? And in the meantime, I'm going to ask you again, you said every character needs an escape hatch in an interview. And I wrote that down because I thought that's really brilliant. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I wish I could take credit for that line. That actually comes from one of my beloved writing teachers, Lindsay Abrams. When I was a student at Sarah Lawrence, she said that, and at the time I didn't fully understand it, but there was something about having characters in difficult places without room to move, without any room to move. And for me, that room to move really kind of manifested itself in the need for dramatic irony, that it can't just be all serious, that dramatic irony, it does allow for the characters to have movement within the text, if that makes any sense. But so that's sort of how I thought about it, that the characters need an escape hatch. I have read stories and some books where everything is very serious with a capital S, and
You don't do
there's no air, and I needed to have air. I needed to have an escape hatch for my characters and for myself, and by extension for the reader. So thinking about irony and humor, that was really the escape. Those were the escape routes for my characters. They would perish if they had not had humor, if they had not had community, if they had not had world building. They would have just perished.
Well, I want to reiterate again that Miss Metropolitan is actually a hilariously funny book, as harrowing as it is. I mean, I'm just leafing through pages and I keep seeing things. Case study of Sundays, hilarious. These quizzes are and that's what makes the book truly profound. Ollie, you said we have a question. You talked about peace as a way to cope. You also mentioned faith as an obstacle. Is there a link between peace and faith, and which presents the better avenue to healing? Well, that's a really good question.
That's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
I would say, well, that's really, really interesting. I would say that faith, I really didn't mean faith. I meant more the organization of faith, the kind of packaging of faith in organized religions. And I think that everyone in this book, I think, has some sort of faith, some abiding faith, even if it is misguided. I think they have some kind of faith. But for people who kind of stick to faith blindly, to an organized faith blindly without thinking, how can, I belong to this church if they won't accept my gay son? How can I, belong to this religion if they don't accept, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really what I was trying to call into question here. And what I felt in the book was that the girls together, through community, found a kind of peace, and they also found a faith. They made their own religion down in that basement and in the rest of the house. So I don't know that peace and faith have to be exclusive to each other. I think that they can go together, and I think that the girls had to have a sense of inner peace in order to move forward. Because again, what is the alternative? Just perishing. So what is that thing that's moving you forward? Peace and faith in something. And it turns out it was faith in each other.
It's a remarkable book. I want to encourage everybody. We always have links to bookshop.org, that you can certainly buy this book at your favorite indie, which you should. And I have one last question, which I always like to ask authors. What's obsessing you now and why?
Oh my
Oh, wait,
goodness.
there's another question for you. Before my question, we have to take an audience question. This is actually from one of our producers. If this has already been discussed, I apologize. No, it hasn't. But I would like to know what Carolyn is reading and loving right now.
Oh, that's such a great question. I am attempting to read because it's the end of the semester, so my reading consists of reading one page and falling asleep at night. But I am reading the latest book by Miriam Toews, Fight Night.
Oh,
Um,
I have that on my
I
content.
started it. It's so funny. It's hilarious. I read Women Talking, and that had a massive effect. Talk about an interesting form. I mean, that book
Mhm.
has really, really interesting form. This summer, I was going to be interviewed by Dan Shawn, and I read the one book of his I had not read, which was Ill
Ta-da.
Will. Oh my goodness. Oh wow.
He's wonderful. I love Dan Shawn.
I read Ill Will, and that is another book of fragments. And I mean, that did happen to be the scariest book I've ever read, but it was so beautiful and so it had humor, it had everything. It was just a work of genius. I also happened to read. I remember reading the review in the Times earlier in the year, and I picked up a copy of Abigail Dean's Girl A, which is
Right.
sort of based on this Turpin family, these children who were held hostage by their parents. And it is just brilliant. I picked it up and I thought, oh, I'm going to be too scared to read it. I'm pretty squeamish. Beautiful, utterly beautiful, beautiful book. And then I have the books that I keep coming back to and rereading. Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, just a brilliant short story collection. And it's the perfect book to read now with all of this horror that's going on, Kyle Rittenhouse, all of this, Ahmaud Arbery's trial coming up. Friday
Right.
Black is the perfect book to read. It's just wonderful. And I finished recently a collection by Disha Philyaw, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, another story collection, which has won a lot of prizes. Just beautiful, a beautiful little book, just gorgeous. So that's what I'm reading and rereading right now.
So I want to return to my last question. What's obsessing you now and why? And will it occur in your next book?
Well, what's obsessing me, I'm always obsessed with Long Island, so that will be in my next book. I am always obsessed with my family histories. So that will also be in my family histories, my father's history in North Carolina and the history of slavery behind that, and my mother's history in Germany, and the whole history behind her relatives. And we recently found out that her great great etc. Ancestors are Jewish, and so that is
Oh,
completely
wow.
that's opened up another avenue in my
Oh,
books.
yeah.
I'm really interested in family histories. Um, Sadly, I'm obsessed with what's happening in the world right now, and
Right.
hoping
We'll
that
talk
we
about
don't go
that.
back to 4 more years of horror.
Sorry. Yep.
But I'm just keeping hopeful, and hoping people read a lot of books and heal themselves in that way and move forward in a more positive way.
I want to thank you so much for coming here. And I want to encourage everyone. This book is so amazing. It's just, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with this book. So go
Thank
and order it, and you can email me, and we can obsess about it together. Together, Carolyn. It's been such an honor for me to meet you and get to talk to you about this book. I've been so excited all week to do this, and the Blaze just really thanks you. Thank you so much for being here.
you. It's just been an honor and such a pleasure to meet a literary giant. Thank
Oh,
you so
you, you're the literary giant.
thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here. Please order this book. It's just astonishing. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye bye.